Hello everyone, I am the Midnight Storyteller. I know you clicked on this video to relax for a while or perhaps to let my voice help you fall asleep. Before you do, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you now? And what time is it? Alright, find a comfortable position and relax. Finding the house felt like a stroke of luck. It wasn't new, maybe 50 or 60 years old, with a solid brick exterior and a spacious yard. It had good bones, a cozy feel, and was exactly within my budget. I was excited to move in, to make it my own, to fill it with my life. The first few days were a blur of unpacking, arranging furniture, and settling into the rhythm of a new home. There was a sense of peace, of possibility. I walked through the rooms, admiring the light, picturing where everything would go. It felt right. The itching started maybe 3 or 4 days after I moved in. It was localized on the back of my left forearm. Not intense at first, just a persistent low-level itch that scratching didn't seem to satisfy for long. I looked at my arm, no rash, no bite mark, just clear skin. I figured I'd brushed against something while moving, maybe some insulation or an old box. I applied some anti-itch cream I had. It provided temporary relief, but the itch returned. Over the next week, the itching continued, cycling between a dull annoyance and a maddening, prickling sensation. It wasn't just my forearm now, it also appeared on a patch of skin on my upper back, just below the shoulder blade, an infuriating spot that was difficult to reach. Both areas remained visually clear, no redness, no bumps, nothing to indicate a physical cause. I started to notice a pattern. The itching was significantly worse, almost aggressively insistent, when I was in specific areas of the house. The living room, particularly near the old brick fireplace, was one such zone. Sitting on the sofa, or standing near the hearth, the itching on my forearm and back would intensify dramatically, sometimes feeling like something was crawling just beneath the surface of my skin. The master bedroom near the large closet wall was another. Just walking into the room would sometimes trigger a flare-up, the itching returning with maddening intensity in those two spots. Leaving these areas would bring relief, the itching subsiding to a low hum or vanishing entirely, only to return the moment I re-entered the jail zones. It was as if the house or something within it was activating this physical symptom in specific locations. I tried everything I could think of. I washed all my clothes and bedding in a different detergent, convinced it was an allergic reaction. I meticulously cleaned the entire house, vacuuming every corner, wiping down surfaces, convinced it was dust mites or a hidden allergen in the old house. I checked myself and my pets for fleas or other bugs. I found none. Nothing helped. The itching persisted, tied specifically to those areas of the house. Concerned and increasingly frustrated, I made an appointment with my doctor. I showed her the areas where I itched, explained that it wasn't constant, but seemed linked to being in certain parts of my new house. She examined my skin thoroughly, used a magnifying glass. "There's no rash, no sign of irritation, no bites," she said, looking puzzled. She suggested it might be stress from moving, or perhaps an invisible allergen, and prescribed a stronger anti-itch cream, and recommended taking antihistamines. I followed her advice. The stronger cream provided the same temporary relief as the old one. A few minutes of peace before the maddening urge to scratch returned. Antihistamines did nothing. The itching continued, localized and relentless in the living room itch zone and the bedroom itch zone. My frustration began to curdle into fear. The itching wasn't physical, not in a way doctors could understand or treat. It was tied to the house itself, a physical manifestation of something unseen, something wrong. I started scratching more intensely, desperate for relief. My skin became raw, visibly irritated from my nails. But the itching remained underneath the surface damage, a deep, maddening torment that no amount of scratching could reach. The sight of my own irritated skin, the result of an itch that wasn't physically there to be scratched, was deeply unsettling. As the itching escalated in the specific zones, I began to notice other subtle anomalies accompanying it. When the itching was at its worst near the fireplace, The air in that corner of the room would feel noticeably colder than the rest of the house, a localized chill that wasn't coming from a draft. In the bedroom itch zone, near the closet wall, I sometimes heard faint sounds, a low, dry whisper that seemed to emanate from within the wall itself, or a soft, rhythmic scraping sound. These sounds, and the cold spots, were most apparent when the itching was most intense in those areas. The house no longer felt cozy or welcoming. It felt like it was inflicting something upon me, making its presence known through this bizarre, localized physical torment. The itching felt less like a medical symptom and more like a signal, a physical manifestation of something pressing in, something trying to get attention, driven by a terrifying need to understand, and perhaps a desperate hope of finding a rational cause. I began investigating the house's history more deeply. I went to the local library, looked through old newspaper archives, property records, local historical societies. I found vague mentions of previous owners, some short residency periods, but nothing concrete about hauntings or strange occurrences. I found some old blueprints of the house, looking for peculiarities. They showed standard construction, no hidden rooms or unusual features in the itch zones. But I did find a few anecdotal mentions in old town forums online, vague stories about the house having a heavy feeling, or previous residents complaining about unexplainable cold spots, or feeling unwell in certain rooms. One post, quickly dismissed by others as local folklore, mentioned something about a lingering imprint in the house, something tied to a past event that affected those sensitive to it. It was frustratingly vague, but the mention of cold spots and feeling unwell resonated with my experience. Was the itching my sensitivity? Was it the imprint, making itself known through me? The psychological spiral was relentless. I was constantly sleep-deprived, tormented by the itching, paranoid about the house. Was the itching a warning? Was it a symptom of something infectious or toxic in the walls that only affected me this way? Or was it something supernatural, a trapped entity or a residual haunting making its presence known by causing me physical discomfort, marking its territory on my skin? The itching felt increasingly personal, targeted. It felt like it was reacting to me, to my fear, to my attempts to understand. Standing in the itch zones, focusing on the sensation, sometimes made the accompanying cold spots and sounds clearer, as if I was somehow amplifying it through my attention or fear. The itching became almost unbearable, a constant maddening torment across my forearm and back, whenever I was in the living room fireplace zone or the bedroom closet wall zone. It was a deep, burning, crawling sensation that no amount of scratching or cream could alleviate. It felt like something was living under my skin in those specific spots, activated by the air or presence of those areas in the house. The accompanying phenomena were no longer subtle either. The cold in the living room corner near the fireplace was intense, bone-chilling, localized to maybe a 10-foot radius. The sounds from within the bedroom wall were clearer, not quite words but definite sounds of struggle, of scraping, of strained breathing. The pressure in the air of the itch zones was palpable, making it hard to breathe deeply. Like an invisible weight was pressing down. The itching felt less like a symptom and more like the front line of a battle, a point of contact where the unknown was trying to interface with me, using my own body as a canvas. The thought was terrifying. The climax of my ordeal came one evening, when the itching in the living room fireplace zone became agonizing. It was more intense than ever before, a burning, crawling, prickling torment across my forearm and back that felt like something was trying to claw its way out from under my skin. I stumbled towards the fireplace, driven by a desperate, frantic need to make it stop, to understand. The cold emanating from the corner was intense, biting. The air was heavy, thick with pressure, and from within the brick of the fireplace itself, I heard it, a low, guttural moan, raw and filled with despair, a sound of pure, trapped suffering. As I stood there, overwhelmed by the sound, the cold, the pressure, and the excruciating itching, I looked down at my left forearm, the primary site of the torment, and for a horrifying second, I saw it on the surface of my skin, just for a fleeting moment before it vanished. I saw a subtle distortion, a ripple, a wave, a barely perceptible movement beneath the skin, as if something was moving rapidly just under the surface, trying to push out. It was accompanied by an intensification of the itching that was almost unbearable, like needles driving deep into my flesh. The sight of the impossible movement beneath my skin, combined with the sound from the fireplace, the cold, and the overwhelming itching, was too much. It shattered my remaining composure. A wave of nausea washed over me. My vision swam. I cried out, a choked sound, and stumbled backward, away from the fireplace, away from the corner. The moment I retreated from the itch zone, the intense itching vanished. The sound from the fireplace stopped. The cold receded. The pressure lifted. I was left standing in the middle of the living room, trembling, gasping for air. My forearms stinging from where I had instinctively tried to scratch through the invisible movement. That night fundamentally broke my relationship with the house. The localized, maddening itching subsided. It hasn't returned with that same intensity in the itch zone since. But a deep sensitivity remains in those areas of my skin. A phantom itch, a subtle prickling, a ghost of the torment, appears randomly, especially when I'm stressed or thinking about the house. I still live here. Driven out by itching seems absurd, even to me. But the house is no longer just a house. It's the itching house, a place where a physical symptom manifested without cause, tied to specific areas that felt wrong, areas that emanated cold and phantom sounds. The living room corner near the fireplace, the bedroom closet wall, they are no longer just parts of rooms. They are markers, places where something unseen made its presence known through the violation of my own body. I never did find a physical cause for the itching or the accompanying phenomena. I still don't know what was causing it. Was it a trapped entity trying to get out, using the itching as a way to manifest or signal? Was the house itself somehow sick, causing a psychosomatic or energetic reaction in me? Was the itching a form of communication I couldn't understand, or a warning I failed to decipher? The memory of that night, the maddening itch, the sound from the fireplace, the cold, the pressure, and the terrifying fleeting movement beneath my skin, haunts me. I live with the chilling knowledge that my skin was a canvas for something inexplicable, and that the itching was the point where the invisible tried to become visible, to break through. And the phantom itch that returns reminds me constantly that whatever it was, it got under my skin in that house. And maybe, just maybe, a piece of that terrifying connection, that unseen imprint, is still there, waiting to be reactivated. Mondays are usually just Mondays, unremarkable. The start of the week, a routine commute, the usual tasks at work, dinner, maybe catch up on some TV, then bed. The Monday that started repeating felt utterly normal. The first time I lived it, I woke up, hit the snooze button twice, listened to the morning news on the radio while making coffee, battled traffic on my way to the office, sat through meetings, had lunch at my desk, dealt with emails, commuted home, had the same leftovers for dinner, watched that show everyone was talking about, and went to bed at the usual time. It was, by all accounts, a perfectly ordinary, forgettable Monday. Tuesday morning, I woke up feeling surprisingly unrested. The sunlight coming through the window looked exactly like it had the previous morning. I hit the snooze button twice. The radio station I listened to for the news was playing a report about a local event that had happened yesterday. That was weird. I glanced at my phone. The date displayed was yesterday's date. My calendar app confirmed it. It was Monday. Again, confusion washed over me. Had I misread everything? Did I sleep so poorly? I felt like I'd lost a day. I shook my head, trying to clear the grogginess. It had to be a mistake. A glitch in my phone, maybe. I reset the date and time manually, making sure it said Tuesday. I went through my morning routine, feeling a subtle sense of unease. But as the day progressed, the unease grew into outright bewilderment. My commute was identical, the same traffic jam on the freeway, the same specific car changing lanes, dangerously ahead of me. At the office, my coworker, Mark, complained about his coffee order being wrong, using the exact same words he'd used yesterday morning. My first meeting covered the exact same points, with the same slightly awkward pause when the boss asked a question nobody wanted to answer. Lunch was the same conversation in the break room. The afternoon emails were the same issues. By 3 p.m., sitting at my desk, rereading an email I was certain I'd responded to yesterday, it hit me with a sickening certainty. This was yesterday. I was reliving Monday. Panic began to bubble in my chest. I tried to talk to Mark about it. "Hey, remember that weird thing with your coffee this morning?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, standard Monday." He sighed. "Happens every week." I pressed him. "No, I mean, today. Didn't you say the same thing yesterday?" He looked at me strangely. Yesterday was Sunday. I didn't get coffee here yesterday. They didn't remember. No one did. To them, this was Monday. The previous day, Sunday, was their only reference point. I was trapped in a loop, the world resetting around me, but I retained the memory of the day I had already lived. Fear quickly replaced confusion. What was happening? Was I going crazy? Having some kind of elaborate breakdown where my brain was replaying the past? But the external reality was too consistent. The traffic, the conversations, the emails. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a physical, undeniable repetition of time. I went home that evening, feeling a profound sense of isolation and terror. I had to be sure. I wrote a detailed note on my computer, time-stamped it, listing the key events of the day, predicting what would happen tomorrow, which was, terrifyingly, today's again. I saved it, emailed it to myself, even took a photo of the screen with my phone. This would be proof. I went to bed, dreading the morning. Tuesday morning. I woke up, sunlight, alarm, radio news report, about yesterday's event, Monday's date on my phone. My heart sank. I rushed to my computer. The note was gone. Deleted. I checked my email. No email to myself. Checked my phone's photo gallery. The picture of the note wasn't there. The reset was total for everything. But my memory. The day repeated again. The same coffee complaint from Mark. The same meeting, the same commute. Trapped, utterly and completely trapped in an ordinary Monday that kept happening. This became my reality. The day repeated again and again. I lost track of how many times. The initial terror gave way to a grim resignation, then a desperate need to understand. Since the events were fixed, I started using the loop to experiment. I tried taking a different route to work. The same traffic jam appeared on that route too, as if the day's script had to be fulfilled, regardless of my actions. I tried confronting Mark directly about the loop. He'd become confused, worried, or just dismissive. His reaction the same each time. But then the repetitions began to introduce changes, subtle at first. In my third or fourth known loop, I noticed the painting on the wall in the office lobby was tilted at a slightly different angle. In the next loop, it was tilted further. In the one after that, it was facing the wall entirely. Small things, easily overlooked by anyone living the day for the first time, but stark and terrifyingly wrong to me. The changes escalated. The crack in the pavement near my apartment, initially tiny, became wider each loop, as if something was pushing up from beneath. Sounds that weren't there before began to appear. A faint scraping outside my apartment window during the commute. A low hum emanating from the office server room. I started seeing figures in the distance that weren't people, dark shapes that flickered in the periphery, always just out of sight. But they became more prominent with each repetition, appearing in different parts of the day's landscape. No one else seemed to notice them. The loop wasn't just stuck anymore, it was degrading, corrupting. And the changes felt malevolent. They seemed to be pointing towards something, or changing, because of me reacting to my awareness of the loop. The fear returned, deeper this time, tangled with paranoia. Was the loop punishing me for trying to break it? Were the horrors it was introducing related to its cause? Was it trying to drive me mad? The changes seemed to be concentrated around a specific time in the day, or a specific location. The commute home often featured the worst of the environmental distortions and the appearance of the disturbing figures. My apartment, especially in the evening, felt like a focal point for the creeping horror. It was as if the loop was guiding me, pushing me towards a specific confrontation within its warped reality. Sleep became terrifying. The transition from the end of the day, the familiar routine leading to bed, to the jarring reset of waking up to Monday again, filled me with dread. I started resisting sleep, staying up as long as I could, but exhaustion always won. And each time I woke, the horrors within the loop had deepened. The psychological toll was immense. Reliving the same day, knowing the script, seeing the subtle but terrifying deviations, being utterly alone in this experience, it frayed my sanity. The line between the loop's reality and what I knew to be true blurred. Was the original Monday the real one? Or was one of these warped versions the true reality? The climax of my nightmare came after an indeterminate number of repetitions. The changes in the loop were now overt, horrifying. The crack in the pavement outside my apartment was a gaping maw from which I heard faint sounds. The figures in the distance were no longer just blurs, but clearly monstrous shapes that moved with impossible speed at the edge of my vision. The office building felt wrong, its architecture subtly shifting, hallways leading to impossible places. The day's events were a twisted parody of the original Monday, familiar conversations overlaid with whispers I couldn't understand, mundane moments punctuated by flashes of surreal horror. The loop seemed unstable, vibrating with wrongness. I knew this repetition was different. This was the breaking point, or the final descent. The horrors of the day seemed to be converging towards my apartment building in the evening, drawn to it like a magnet, driven by a desperate need to end it, to confront whatever was behind the loop. I made a choice this time. Instead of trying to avoid the escalating horrors of the evening, I leaned into them. I walked towards the grotesque shapes flickering at the edge of my vision. I listened to the impossible whispers. I followed the pull of the warped day towards my apartment building. Reaching my building at the appointed terrible hour of the loop's climax, I found it transformed. The facade seemed to ripple, the windows like dark, depthless eyes. The air around it was thick, heavy, charged with a terrifying energy. The street was empty, silent, devoid of the usual evening sounds, and standing directly in front of the main entrance was the figure. No longer distant, no longer a blur. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs angular and wrong, its face a smooth, featureless surface that seemed to absorb the light. It was utterly still, but radiated a palpable sense of menace. It raised a long, spindly arm and pointed directly at me, and from the space around it, I heard a sound, not a voice but a complex, horrifying symphony of clicks, scrapes and low, guttural sounds that seemed to convey a sense of immense power and alien awareness. It felt like the entity behind the loop, or the loop itself given form, was standing before me. Terror, pure and absolute, seized me. I stumbled backward, overwhelmed by the sight and the sound. The loop's final, terrifying act was this confrontation, and then, as the figure stood there, pointing, emitting its horrifying sounds, the world around me seemed to shatter. The streetlights flickered violently, the buildings seemed to buckle and twist, and the air filled with a sound like tearing fabric, immense and loud. I squeezed my eyes shut, covering my ears, screaming. And then silence. I woke up, sunlight through the window, alarm clock beeping. I opened my eyes, bracing myself for Monday's date. But the date on the alarm clock was Tuesday. I checked my phone, Tuesday. The radio was playing today's news. The loop was broken. It was over. The relief was immense. A physical weight lifted. But the horror of the repeated days, the escalating changes, the terrifying figures, and the final confrontation with the entity are burned into my mind. I remember every iteration, every terrifying detail. I live in linear time again, but reality feels fragile. I constantly check dates, look for subtle inconsistencies in my surroundings. Nightmares of the warped loops, the decaying day, and the featureless figure haunt my sleep. I don't know what caused the loop, or what the entity was, or why it chose me, but I know that for a time my life was edited by something terrifying, and I saw versions of reality that should not exist. and the chilling knowledge that the loop wasn't just happening to me, but might have been happening through me, or because of me, is a terrifying thought. The memory of those repeating Mondays, of the horror that grew within them, is a permanent scar, and I'm forever left wondering if the loop truly ended, or if I just moved on, while it continues somewhere, or simply paused, waiting for the next Tuesday to become Monday again. There's a certain kind of souvenir you pick up without thinking, not something you buy, but something you find, a piece of the world that feels unique enough to pocket. For me, it was a stone. I found it on a long walk along a deserted stretch of beach, far from the usual tourist spots. It wasn't a typical smooth pebble. It was dark, almost black, heavy in my hand, and incredibly smooth, as if polished by centuries of waves. What caught my eye were the patterns embedded within it, faint swirls of a lighter, almost metallic gray weaving through the dark stone like captured smoke. It looked ancient, beautiful, and just strange enough to keep. I took it home and placed it on my windowsill, where the light could catch its subtle patterns. For the first few days, it was just a stone on a windowsill. I'd glance at it occasionally, appreciating its quiet strangeness. But then I started noticing something subtle. When I spent a lot of time in the room, reading or working near the windowsill, the gray swirls in the stone seemed to deepen in color, to become more pronounced, almost vibrating with a faint inner light. If I was out of the room for a day or didn't look at it much, the swirls seemed duller, flatter. At first I dismissed it. Trick of the light, I thought, or maybe the stone absorbing heat from the sun. But the correlation seemed too consistent. I started experimenting. I'd deliberately spend an hour just sitting near the stone, occasionally picking it up, focusing my attention on it. The swirling patterns would visibly brighten, the faint inner light intensifying. Then I'd put it in a drawer out of sight for a day. When I took it out, the swirls would be faded, the stone feeling inert. It was reacting. This inanimate object was somehow responding to my presence, my attention. It felt less like a reaction to light or heat, and more like it was feeding on my focus, my awareness. The idea was unsettling, but also morbidly fascinating. This developed into a strange, unsettling routine. The stone needed attention. If I ignored it for too long, not only would the swirls fade, but I would start feeling a subtle unease whenever I was in the room. The air around the windowsill would feel colder. I'd hear faint, inexplicable sounds that seemed to emanate from the stone's direction. A low hum, or a sound like tiny particles shifting. These subtle signs felt like a demand, a silent solicitation for attention. So I gave it attention. I'd sit near it, hold it, look at its patterns, and it would respond, the swirls brightening, the hum fading, the cold receding. It felt like tending to a bizarre, silent pet that subsisted on my focus. But the fascination was increasingly mixed with fear. What was this thing? Why did it respond this way? What was the attention doing to it? What was it becoming? The changes became less subtle, more disturbing. When the stone was particularly well fed, the swirling patterns didn't just brighten. They seemed to gain depth, to shift and rearrange themselves into more complex, less random forms. They started looking less like natural swirls and more like structures, or maybe parts of something organic seen from above, veins, or perhaps clusters of eyes tightly packed together. The stone itself felt subtly warmer when vibrant, almost unnaturally so. The feeding felt increasingly like a drain. After spending a long period focusing on the stone, making its patterns glow brightly, I would feel tired, mentally fatigued, as if my energy had been siphoned off. This wasn't just psychological, it felt physical, a subtle depletion that coincided with the stone's increased vibrancy. The stone wasn't just feeding on my attention, it felt like it was feeding on something more. My focus, my energy, maybe even my thoughts or emotions. The demands for feeding became more insistent. If I tried to go a full day without giving it significant attention, the solicitory signals intensified. The hum from the stone would become a distinct, low vibration that I felt in my hand, even without touching it. The cold radiating from the windowsill area would become biting, undeniable. The pull of attention towards it would feel like an almost physical tug. Ignoring it felt like neglecting something that was now subtly woven into the fabric of my home, something that would complain if it wasn't sated. The changes in the stone itself became overtly horrifying. The swirling patterns, when intensely fed, no longer looked like patterns. They looked like something biological, like dark swirling masses of cells or tangled root systems, pulsing faintly with that inner light. Sometimes, for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a structure within the swirls, something that looked horrifyingly like a cluster of tiny dark eyes staring back at me from within the stone's depths. The psychological spiral was severe. I was obsessed with the stone, trapped in a horrifying relationship with it. Fear battled guilt, guilt for neglecting it and making it demand, fear of giving it attention and making it grow, making it change. My sanity felt fragile, my perception warped by the stone's bizarre properties, and the constant drain it seemed to exert. Nightmares about being absorbed by swirling patterns, or being devoured by silent, unseen things plagued my sleep. The feeding felt increasingly like it was taking my life force, my vitality. The more vibrant the stone, the more drained I felt. The realization dawned, slow and horrifying. I wasn't just feeding it attention. I was feeding it a part of myself. The climax built steadily. The stone was demanding more. The solicitations were constant, aggressive, a continuous low vibration, an intense cold permeating the corner of the room, a constant low hum that seemed to resonate inside my head. The swirling patterns on its surface were now a deep, vibrant, terrifying black and gray, seemingly moving sluggishly beneath the surface like something alive and hungry. I knew it was reaching a critical point. It was undergoing a significant transformation, fueled by everything I had given it. I felt a terrifying compulsion to give it more, to satisfy its insatiable hunger, to see what it would become. It was a mix of fear, despair, and a twisted, morbid curiosity. Holding the stone one last time, during this peak of its demand and transformation, was agony. The vibration was violent, shaking my entire arm. A searing cold pulsed from it, burning like fire. The hum intensified into a deafening roar, not in my ears but inside my skull. The swirling patterns on the stone's surface seemed to deepen into an infinite swirling vortex of darkness. And from within that vortex, I heard sounds, screams, whispers, growls, all layered upon each other, emanating from the stone, but also seeming to come from everywhere at once. It felt like the stone was trying to pull me in, to absorb me completely. I felt my energy being violently siphoned off, a terrifying emptiness blooming in my chest. Images flashed in my mind, falling endlessly through darkness, being consumed by swirling, unseen things, the same horrors I had glimpsed in the stone's patterns. It was a terrifying, active feeding, and I was the meal, driven by a last surge of adrenaline and a desperate primal will to survive. I screamed and hurled the stone away from me with all my might. It flew across the room, struck the opposite wall with a sickening thud, and fell to the floor. The sound stopped. The vibration ceased. The cold receded. I fell to my knees, gasping, trembling, my hand burning and numb, my body aching, feeling utterly drained. The vortex in my mind receded, leaving behind a horrifying, crystal-clear memory. I crawled towards the stone, hesitantly. It lay on the floor, no longer glowing or vibrating. It was just a stone again, dark and still. The swirling patterns were faded, dull. It looked inert, lifeless, but I knew what it was, or what it could become. I gathered it up with trembling hands, wrapped it tightly in cloth, put it in a box, and buried it deep in the woods, miles away. The stone is gone, but the feeling isn't. I still feel phantom vibrations in my hand sometimes. I feel sudden, inexplicable cold spots, and occasionally, I feel that terrifying sense of being drained, a sudden emptiness in my chest. as if something is still trying to feed. The experience permanently altered me. I look at inanimate objects differently now, especially unique ones. I wonder what hidden properties they might have, what they might respond to, what they might require. The fear of inadvertently feeding something again is constant. I don't know if the stone died, or if it's just dormant, waiting, but I know it fed on me, on my attention, my energy, my fear. And the chilling thought that sometimes, when you find something unique, it's not a treasure. It's something that was waiting to be found, waiting to be fed, and that the relationship you form with it can be a terrifying parasitic nightmare that leaves you with a permanent scar, a lasting sense that something out there is still hungry and remembers being fed. I decided to install a home security system a few months ago. Not because I live in a bad neighborhood, but just for peace of mind, a little extra sense of security. I got a system with 4 cameras, one covering the front porch, one the backyard, one in the living room, and one in the main hallway upstairs. The cameras were simple, motion activated, recording footage to a cloud service that I could access through an app on my phone or a small monitor I kept in my office. Checking the footage became part of my routine. A quick scroll through the day's clips to see if any packages arrived or if the dog walker showed up on time. It was mundane, practical, and utterly normal, until the footage started showing things that weren't. The first time I noticed something off was in a clip from the front porch camera, time-stamped late at night. A recycling bin standing near the corner of the porch seemed to jump slightly to the left for a single frame, then jump back. It was a tiny glitch, easily missed. I assumed it was a compression artifact, a brief skip in the digital recording, or maybe just glare from a passing car. I dismissed it and moved on. But then I saw something similar a few days later, this time in a clip from the living room camera. The door leading to the kitchen, visible in the frame, seemed to swing open a few inches, then swing shut, over the course of maybe half a second. No one was visible in the room in the footage, and the motion was too smooth, too deliberate for a gust of wind. Again, I told myself it was a glitch, a camera artifact, maybe even a trick of the light combined with shadow. The anomalies became more frequent, less deniable. In the backyard camera feed, a tool left on a garden table moved several inches across the surface, seemingly on its own, while the yard was empty in the recording. In the upstairs hallway camera, a shadowy figure appeared in a doorway for a single frame, then vanished. These weren't static jumps now. They were movements, disappearances, appearances captured in the recording, but utterly absent from the reality they were supposedly documenting. I started reviewing the footage meticulously, frame by frame, using the system's playback feature. The movements weren't jumpy, they were smooth, impossible motions happening in empty spaces. Objects sliding, doors opening, figures appearing and vanishing, as if reality itself was stuttering. The terrifying realization dawned on me. The cameras weren't malfunctioning in the traditional sense. They were capturing something that was happening in those spaces, but which was invisible or otherwise undetectable. At the time the footage was recorded, the footage was showing a hidden layer of reality. This led to a new, horrifying level of investigation. I started checking multiple camera feeds covering the same areas for the same time frame. In one clip, the living room door would swing open. I'd check the hallway camera covering the approach to the living room for that exact timestamp. Empty. No one entered or left the living room. I'd check the backyard camera. Perhaps while the living room door was opening, a tool in the backyard would simultaneously move, even though the two areas were far apart and unconnected. The anomalies were happening in different unconnected physical spaces, but sometimes at the exact same moment in the recorded time. They were simultaneous impossibilities. I became obsessed with the footage. I'd spend hours reviewing clips, looking for patterns, for clues. Was it happening at specific times? In specific locations? Was it related to who was or wasn't in the house? I asked my family if they had seen anything unusual. Even small things. A door ajar they were sure they'd closed. an object moved. They hadn't. To them, the house was normal. This isolation of the experience, the knowledge that only I was seeing these impossible events in the recordings, was terrifyingly isolating. It made me question my own sanity, even while staring at undeniable visual evidence on the screen. I tried to find rational explanations again, delving deeper. Was someone hacking my system and inserting clips? The cloud service was encrypted, supposedly secure. Was there some unknown environmental factor causing localized, intermittent distortions that only affected the cameras? It seemed incredibly far-fetched. I ruled out physical tampering. The objects weren't being moved by strings. The figures weren't reflections. The psychological toll was immense. My home, the place where I should feel safest, felt invaded by something invisible, something that only revealed itself when captured by a passive eye. I became paranoid about the monitored spaces. Walking into the living room, I'd glance at the camera, then around the room, seeing nothing, but knowing that later, the recording of this moment might show a figure standing behind the sofa or the kitchen door, slowly opening on its own. I felt watched constantly, not by potential intruders, but by the entity or force that was appearing in the recordings. The cameras were no longer just security tools. They were windows into a terrifying parallel reality. The anomalies in the footage seemed to respond to my scrutiny. When I spent a lot of time reviewing clips, the frequency of new anomalies would increase. Disturbing messages or symbols would sometimes appear briefly. Overlaid on the footage, fragments of text that didn't belong. Abstract symbols formed by impossible arrangements of pixels. The figures appearing in the footage seemed to spend more time looking directly into the camera lens, their indistinct forms radiating a palpable sense of being aware that they were being watched. It felt like whatever it was, it knew I was viewing the footage, and it was reacting to me, escalating its activity, making itself more known. The terror built to a breaking point. The anomalies weren't just random events anymore. They were forming disturbing sequences. A figure would appear in the backyard footage, walk towards the house, disappear as it reached the wall, and then, a fraction of a second later, appear in the living room footage, standing still near the doorway. It was moving between spaces impossibly, and the cameras were charting its terrifying path. The footage itself would sometimes distort violently when these sequences occurred. The image pixelating, colors shifting, briefly showing static or bizarre patterns before returning to the impossible scene. It felt like the line between the recorded reality and my reality was becoming dangerously thin. The climax came one evening as I was watching the live feed from the living room camera on my monitor. The room was empty, quiet. On the screen, everything looked normal. But as I watched, a figure materialized in the far corner of the room in the feed. It was the same figure, tall, shadowy, but it was sharper now, more defined. Its form seemed to radiate an unnatural distortion that the camera somehow captured. It stood there for a moment, static. Then it moved. Not walking, but a smooth, gliding motion, directly towards the camera, towards the center of the room. As it moved, the image on the monitor flickered, the colors shifted to sickening negatives. The figure didn't stop. It moved right up to where the camera was positioned in the room, filling the frame, its indistinct head tilted slightly. And then, its dark, featureless face was filling the screen, looking directly into the lens, looking out, as its face filled the screen, looking directly at me. The image on the monitor didn't just show the camera feed anymore. For a horrifying second, the screen warped, showing a flash of something else entirely. A gaping, toothless maw. A swirling vortex of darkness, layers of screaming faces, all compressed into an instant of visual terror. Simultaneously, a wave of intense cold slammed into me from the monitor, and I felt a brief, sharp pressure against my eyes, as if the figure was trying to look back with physical force, to reach through the screen. With a choked scream, I lunged back from the monitor, knocking my chair over. The monitor screen went black. The system crashed. Silence returned to the room, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. My device was dead. But the image of that face, looking out of the screen, the flash of horror, The feeling of cold and pressure. It was burned into my mind. I haven't turned on the security system since that night. The cameras are still there, passive lenses in the corners of rooms, but I avoid looking at them. The memory of what the footage showed, what the footage captured, is a constant source of terror. I don't know what that figure is, or why it appeared in my recordings, or how it moved so impossibly, or why it seemed to look back at me through the screen. Is it a ghost tied to the house? A glitch in reality that only appears when observed indirectly? An entity that exists in non-linear time? I have no answers, but the experience fundamentally altered my perception of recorded media and the spaces around me. I live with the chilling knowledge that those seemingly empty rooms, those quiet spaces captured by the cameras, are not always empty. They contain something terrifying, something that defies physics, and that my security system, meant to provide peace of mind, instead opened a window into a hidden nightmare. And the thought that the figure saw me watching, that it looked out of the screen directly at me, is a haunting reminder that whatever it is, it's aware. And it exists in the spaces I walk through, just beyond visible light, perhaps waiting for the next camera to capture it. Or maybe waiting for a chance to step out of the footage and into my reality for good. Plumbing. It's one of those utterly mundane things you only think about when it stops working. It's hidden away behind walls and beneath floors, a network of pipes channeling water in and waste out. It's clean, functional, and should be silent when not in use. My plumbing was no different. My apartment, my kitchen sink, my bathroom sink, my shower, all worked exactly as they should. The pipes were silent when the water was off, until they weren't. It started in the kitchen sink. I was washing dishes one evening, finished up and turned off the tap. As the last of the water gurgled down the drain, I heard a sound that wasn't quite right. A low, wet gurgle, different from the usual draining sound, deeper, somehow heavier. It lasted only a second or two. Long after the water was gone, I paused, listening. Nothing. Weird, I thought. Must be an air bubble. I shrugged it off. A few days later I heard it again. The same strange gurgle from the kitchen sink drain, but this time, I hadn't been running water. I was just walking past the sink, and I heard that low, heavy sound briefly emerge from the drain cover, followed by what sounded like a very faint, wet thud, like something heavy had just landed in water, far below. Then other drains started producing sounds. The shower drain in the bathroom began emitting a faint, rhythmic dripping sound, even when the shower hadn't been used in hours and was completely dry. It wasn't the sound of dripping water. It was a dry, hollow tap. 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 Like a tiny hammer hitting a wet pipe, or something else entirely. The sounds were subtle at first, easily dismissed as the house settling, pipes expanding or contracting, or external sounds echoing strangely through the plumbing system. But they were persistent, appearing at odd times, specifically from the drains, and only when the water was off. I started investigating. I'd listen closely to the drains, trying to pinpoint the origin. The sounds seemed to come from deep within the pipes, far below the visible opening. I tried pouring boiling water down the drains, thinking it might clear a partial blockage causing weird gurgles. The sound stopped while the water ran, but returned later. I used drain cleaner, no effect. I even tried snaking the drains as far as the snake would go. It met no blockage, found nothing unusual, but the sounds persisted. I asked friends to listen when they were over. Standing near the kitchen sink, I'd hear the gurgle and the wet thud. "Do you hear that?" I'd ask, gesturing towards the drain. They'd tilt their heads, listen intently. "Hear what?" they'd say. "The drain's quiet." I'd describe the gurgle, the thud. They'd look at me strangely. "I don't hear anything." They'd insist. "Maybe it's your pipes settling." Their inability to hear the sounds was terrifyingly isolating. It meant the sounds weren't a physical phenomenon in the pipes that everyone could perceive. It was either in my head, a horrifying symptom of delusion, or the sounds were somehow tied to me, or able to bypass the normal senses of others. The self-doubt was agonizing, battling against the undeniable reality of the sounds I was hearing so clearly. The sounds escalated, becoming more complex, more disturbing. The gurgles from the kitchen drain started to sound less like water and more like choked, wet breathing or a low, continuous sucking sound. The dry tapping from the shower drain became faster, sometimes sounding like frantic scratching, and the bathroom sink drain, which had initially been silent, started emitting low murmurs, whispers, a blend of sounds that hinted at voices but remained just beyond the threshold of understanding. These weren't plumbing noises, they felt biological, deliberate. They felt like they were coming from something alive, or trapped or waiting, deep within the pipes or in a space the pipes led to. The sounds seemed to react to my presence. They'd be quiet when I first entered a room, but if I lingered, especially in silence, they would begin, low at first, then intensifying, as if acknowledging my presence. Accompanying sensory details started to appear when the drain sounds were active. A localized cold spot around the drain itself, particularly the bathroom sink drain, a disturbing smell emanating from the drain. Not sewer gas, but something fuller, like stagnant water mixed with decay, or something metallic and organic. A feeling of pressure in the air, near the drain, making it hard to breathe deeply. The psychological toll was immense. I was consumed by fear of the drains. Using the sink or shower, even with water running, felt like an act of bravery, knowing what might be waiting below. Turning the water off and leaving the drain open was terrifying. A moment of exposure, waiting for the sounds to begin. I started avoiding the drains, using bottled water, showering at the gym. The apartment, my home, felt like it was connected to something foul and terrifying beneath the surface. Accessed through the plumbing, the whispers from the bathroom sink drain became clearer, hinting at words, at language, still distorted, wet, and gurgling. But I started to pick out syllables, fragments of sound that sent chills down my spine. They seemed to be repeating things, names, maybe mine, maybe others, tangled with sounds of distress and chilling. Wet laughter. The sounds reached a fever pitch, becoming overtly threatening, overwhelming. They no longer felt like they were trapped. They felt like they were trying to get out. The climax came late one night. The entire apartment was silent. I was in the living room, trying to relax, but the silence felt charged, expectant. Suddenly the sounds began, not subtly but erupting from all the drains simultaneously. The kitchen sink emitted violent, rapid sucking sounds and wet thuds. The shower drain produced frantic, loud scraping and tapping. And from the bathroom sink drain came a chorus of loud, distorted whispers, shrieks and gurgling sounds that filled the apartment. The volume and intensity were terrifying. It felt like the entire plumbing system was screaming. The sounds weren't just heard, they were felt. The floor beneath my feet vibrated faintly. The air in the apartment grew intensely cold, carrying that foul, decaying smell. Driven by a desperate need to make it stop, or to see, I stumbled towards the bathroom, where the sounds from the sink drain were loudest and most horrifying. As I reached the sink, the sounds intensified further, a chaotic, deafening blend of wet gurgles, screams and distorted whispers erupted from the small drain opening. The sink basin vibrated violently under my hands. A thick, foul-smelling mist, cold and heavy, rose from the drain, and for a horrifying second, staring down into the black opening, I saw a fleeting, visual distortion within, a shimmer, a warping of the darkness that suggested movement, depth, a vast, unseen space, just beyond the drain cover. I felt a terrifying pull, a physical sensation like something was reaching up from below, trying to grab me, trying to pull me down into the darkness of the drain. The sounds, the smell, the mist, the vibration, the pull, the terrifying glimpse into the darkness. It was an overwhelming multi-sensory assault from below. It felt like whatever was down there was making a full, terrifying attempt to manifest, using the drain as a gateway. Screaming, I scrambled away from the sink, away from the drain, stumbling out of the bathroom, and into the hallway, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the source of the horror. The moment I was clear of the bathroom doorway, the sound stopped. The air cleared, the apartment fell silent again, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. I didn't stay in that apartment. I left shortly after, breaking my lease, abandoning everything. The thought of using any drain, of being near any sink or shower, filled me with pure dread. The intense sounds haven't followed me to my new place, but the fear remains. I still hear phantom gurgles and whispers sometimes, especially when I'm near a drain or hear water running in pipes. I avoid looking into drains. I still get a jolt of panic from that foul metallic smell if I encounter something similar. I don't know what was in those pipes or what space the drains were connected to. Was it a trapped entity, a dimensional anomaly, a physical manifestation of the house's dark history? I have no answers, but the experience showed me that our homes, our cities, are built over layers of unknown, and that sometimes the most ordinary connections, like plumbing, can be pathways to something terrifyingly extraordinary. And I live with the chilling knowledge that somewhere below, in the dark spaces beneath our world, something was talking through the drains, and it might still be listening. I've always had a fascination with maps, their representations of reality, attempts to codify the complex world around us into something understandable, navigable. They offer a sense of control, a way to orient ourselves. I often pick them up in used bookstores or antique shops, drawn to their history, the glimpse they offer into how places once were. That's where I found it, an old folded paper map of the city neighborhood I live in. It looked charmingly outdated, maybe from the mid-20th century. I bought it more as a piece of decor than for actual navigation, intending to frame it and hang it on my wall. I pinned the map up in my office. I was very familiar with the area it depicted. My home, my commute, my usual spots were all within its boundaries. Comparing it to a modern map was interesting. I noted a few streets that had been renamed, a couple of buildings that were no longer there. It was a comforting object, a tangible link to the past of a place I knew well. A few days after hanging it, I was glancing at it idly, my mind drifting. I noticed a street marked on it that I didn't recognize. It was a thin line, unlabeled, branching off a street I knew well, leading into a block that was currently just a park on modern maps. I figured it was an old defunct street, perhaps removed decades ago. It was a minor detail, easily dismissed as historical inaccuracy. But a week later, looking at the map again, the street was clearer. It was now labeled, the name penned in a fine dark script, Elmwood Lane. I was certain the name hadn't been there before. The line of the street was darker too, more prominent against the faded paper. And another detail had appeared, a small square building outline nestled in what I knew was still just parkland. My initial thought was that I was simply unobservant, that these details were always there, and I had only just noticed them. But the feeling that they were new, that the map was somehow changing, was unsettling. Over the next few weeks, the changes accelerated. New streets appeared, intersecting the known ones, winding through blocks that should have been solid buildings or empty lots. Buildings materialized on the map, drawn in a stark, simple style that didn't match the other cartography. Markings started appearing, small X's near certain intersections, disturbing symbols that looked vaguely occult near some of the newly appeared buildings, lines highlighted in a faint, unnatural red. I tried to verify these changes in reality. I walked to where Elmwood Lane should be. Nothing there but fences and the backs of houses. I went to the park, still just a park. No building. I tried to follow the path of a newly appearing street. It led me through familiar areas that felt subtly wrong, like the map was describing a place overlaid on reality, but not quite fitting. I tried to alter the map itself. I took a pen and tried to draw a line over one of the new streets. The ink refused to stick to the paper, beating up and rolling off, as if the surface was subtly repelling it. I tried erasing one of the new markings. The paper beneath seemed unaffected, the mark remaining as if it was part of the original print. It was impossible. The map was changing on its own, its reality separate from, and impervious to mine. I began to show the map to friends, pointing out the new streets, the impossible buildings. They'd look at it, their brows furrowed. Elmwood Lane. Never heard of it. Are you sure this isn't just an old, inaccurate map? They saw the features, but they didn't see the newness of them, the way they hadn't been there before. They saw an old map with some quirks. I saw a living, changing document. This isolation of the experience fueled my fear, making me question my sanity. Even while staring at the undeniable evidence of the changing paper, the psychological toll was immense. The map became an obsession. My understanding of the place I lived was being challenged, distorted. Was the map showing me a hidden layer of the city, a past that refused to die, a future that was being planned, or was it simply wrong, and I was fixating on its errors to the point of delusion? The fear of following its directions was immense. Where would those impossible streets truly lead? But the compulsion to understand, to see what the map would reveal next, was stronger. The changes on the map became more overtly disturbing, more personal. Some of the new streets seemed to loop back on themselves, forming impossible labyrinths. The symbols grew more menacing. Areas were marked with phrases written in that fine, dark script that looked chillingly like handwriting. Lost, danger, waiting. The red lines highlighting routes became thicker, more vibrant, pulsing faintly when I stared at them. The map felt cold to the touch when a significant change had occurred, or when I was looking at one of the menacingly marked areas. It felt like it was alive, malevolent, trying to draw me into its impossible geography. I made a few cautious, terrifying explorations. Based on the map's less threatening new features, I tried to walk where a new alley was shown. The gap between the buildings was there, but it felt longer, darker, and I heard faint, unsettling sounds emanating from the darkness that didn't belong in the city. I retreated quickly, shaken, the map's reality momentarily bleeding into mine. The terror built steadily, culminating one stormy night. The lights in my office flickered. The map pinned on the wall seemed to shift and ripple slightly in the unsteady light. And then it underwent a final dramatic transformation. A single, thick, pulsing red line erupted from a point near my apartment on the map, cutting a direct path across several blocks marked with increasingly horrifying symbols and impossible-looking buildings, leading to a single destination. A large, dark building marked with a prominent glowing skull symbol located in an area I knew to be an abandoned industrial complex. The entire map seemed to hum faintly, radiating an intense cold that filled the office. The pulsing red line felt like a physical pull, demanding I follow. It was the culmination of the map's influence, a clear, terrifying invitation or command. The fear was immense, crippling, but the obsession, the need to see the final secret of the map, was overwhelming. Against all rational judgment, I decided to follow, armed with a flashlight and propelled by a mix of terror and desperate resolve. I left my apartment and headed into the stormy night, navigating by the map's impossible directions. The journey was disorienting. Familiar streets seemed to subtly twist, to align with the map's impossible geometry. Buildings I knew well seemed to look different, their facades subtly altered. The sounds of the storm were warped, muffled, replaced by the map's faint humming resonance. Following the pulsing red line, I reached the location indicated on the map, the abandoned industrial complex. The air here was thick with the smell of damp concrete and rust, heavy with a sense of decay and dread, and in the center of what should have been a crumbling lot, stood a building. It matched the drawing on the map perfectly, large, dark, imposing, marked with that chilling skull symbol above its heavy metal door. It was clearly part of the old complex, but it was a building I had never seen before, a structure that didn't appear on any normal map or in any aerial photo I had ever seen. It was the map's destination. The metal door was ajar, revealing darkness within, driven by a terrifying compulsion. The map feeling intensely cold and vibrating in my hand. I stepped across the threshold. Inside was utter blackness and a profound, unnatural silence. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing rough concrete walls, rusted pipes, and a floor covered in dust and debris. but as I shone the light around, I saw them, scratched and drawn on the walls, covering every surface, were the symbols from the map, the swirling lines, the disturbing figures, the ominous glyphs, and in the center of the large room, lying on the floor, was a collection of objects, old tools, rusting chains, tattered cloth, arranged in a deliberate, horrifying pattern, around a dark stain on the concrete that looked chillingly like dried blood. As I stood there, frozen by the horrifying scene, my hand trembling, the map in my grasp suddenly felt impossibly cold, and it began to vibrate violently. The red line on the map pulsed with a blinding light, and then terrifyingly, from the pattern of objects on the floor, and from the symbols on the walls, I heard a sound, a low, collective whisper, emanating from the very structure of the room, repeating the words I had seen on the map: hunger, waits, join us. The sound, the sight, the cold, the vibration, it was overwhelming. It felt like the room itself was a manifestation of the map's horrors, and I had walked right into its core. With a cry of pure terror, I threw the map away. It hit the wall and disintegrated into a cloud of dust and ash, the vibrant red line vanishing in a final flicker of light. I scrambled out of the building, running back into the stormy night, not daring to look back, running until I was back on a familiar street, gasping, trembling, collapsing onto the wet pavement. The map is gone, but the knowledge of the impossible paths it depicted, the horrifying destination it led me to, and the things I saw and heard there, are burned into my mind. I live in a world where geography feels unstable, where a simple turn down a street might lead to somewhere that shouldn't exist. I avoid old industrial areas, abandoned places. The memory of the map's final form, the symbols, the words, the sounds in that dark room, haunts me. I don't know what created the map, or why it showed me those things, or what hunger waits, but it opened a door for me, a terrifying glimpse into a hidden reality, and I live with the chilling fear that without the map, I might stumble onto one of its impossible streets again, and this time, I might not find my way back to the world I know. And that maybe, just maybe, the map wasn't just showing me hidden places, it was making them real. And I was the one who activated them. We rely on our eyes for almost everything. They are our primary connection to the world, constantly taking in information, processing the reality around us. We pay attention to what's directly in front of us, the central focus of our vision. But there's also the periphery, the wide, hazy area at the edge of our sight. It's where we catch movement, detect changes, notice things that aren't the main focus. It's supposed to be a passive guardian, a silent alarm system. For me, it became a source of constant, inescapable terror. It started subtly, a flicker of movement caught in my peripheral vision. Walking down a busy street, I'd see a dark shape in the far corner of my eye. Just for a fraction of a second, I'd turn my head to look, and it would be gone. Nothing there. Driving, glancing in the side mirror, I'd see a blur of dark movement in the reflected periphery. Check the mirror properly. Check the road. Nothing. At first I dismissed it. Tired eyes. I thought, the visual static you sometimes get. Floaters. Glare on surfaces, the brain misinterpreting shadows or sudden changes in light. It happened occasionally, not enough to be genuinely alarming, just a minor, ignorable quirk of perception. But the peripheral sightings became more frequent, and they weren't just random blurs anymore. They consistently suggested a shape, a human shape, a figure, always dark, always at the very edge of my vision. I'd be sitting at home reading, and I'd see a dark shape in the periphery near the doorway. Turn my head, gone. Immediately I'd see it in the periphery on the other side of the room, near the window. Turn to look, gone. It was like it was moving faster than I could turn my head, always staying just outside the area of my direct focus. This consistency was terrifying. It wasn't random. It was a specific, recurring visual anomaly, a figure that existed only at the edge of my sight. Its appearance was blurry, indistinct, but I started to recognize its general outline. Tall, slender, its posture, always oddly still when glimpsed. I began experimenting. I'd sit perfectly still and try to catch it in my periphery. I'd see it, a dark shape, static, maybe near a corner of the room. I'd then try snapping my head around as fast as possible to face it directly. Every time it would vanish just before my central vision could land on it, only to reappear instantly in my periphery as I looked away from that spot. It was always there, just out of direct sight, a constant companion at the edge of my vision. I tried using mirrors. I'd stand in front of the bathroom mirror and try to use my peripheral vision to see the figure reflected in the mirror's edge, just outside the direct reflection of myself. I'd glimpse it, a dark shape standing behind me in the reflection, but as I turned to look at the mirror directly, it would vanish from the reflection and simultaneously vanish from my real-world periphery. It was tied to my sight somehow, to the act of perception itself. I tried documenting it. I'd set up my phone to record video, trying to capture the space where I usually saw it in my periphery. When I reviewed the footage, it looked normal. No figure, no anomaly. The camera saw only the mundane reality. I saw something else. This failure to capture it was deeply unsettling, fueling the terrifying possibility that it was all in my head. A horrifying symptom of psychosis, but the sightings felt too real, too consistent, too responsive to be mere hallucination. The psychological toll was immense. The figure was everywhere, indoors, outdoors, day, night. Walking down the street, I was constantly aware of it in my periphery, a dark shape keeping pace with me, just out of sight. In a crowded room, I'd see it near a wall, static and chilling, while everyone else was moving around it, oblivious. The feeling of being watched was constant, intense, and deeply personal. It wasn't just seeing a figure. It was feeling its presence, its stillness, its unwavering gaze from the edge of my sight. I became exhausted from the constant vigilance, the inability to relax my peripheral vision. Paranoia gnawed at me. Was it just a visual anomaly, something wrong with my brain? Or was it a real entity that existed just outside the normal spectrum of human sight, only visible in the less focused areas of vision? And if it was real, why was it always there, at the edge, watching me? The figure seemed to react to my emotional state. When I was particularly scared or anxious, the sightings would become more frequent, the figure seeming to linger in my periphery for slightly longer periods, its form looking sharper, more defined. Sometimes when I saw it, I would feel a sudden localized cold spot in the air near where it was glimpsed, or hear a faint, almost inaudible sound that seemed to emanate from its direction, a low hum, a dry whisper. The figure in my periphery also seemed to guide my attention. It would appear near things I should notice, near potential dangers, or near objects or places that felt subtly wrong. It felt like it was highlighting aspects of reality, perhaps warning me, or perhaps trying to direct me towards something. The figure's presence became overwhelming. It was almost constantly visible in my periphery, a silent dark shadow that followed me everywhere. The accompanying cold spots, sounds, and feeling of being watched were persistent. The boundary between my peripheral and central vision felt thin, unstable. The figure seemed to be pushing its way closer, lingering for longer fractions of a second each time before vanishing. I sensed an impending event, a moment where the figure would finally cross the line, step out of the periphery, and become fully visible. The dread was immense, paralyzing. The climax happened unexpectedly. Late one evening, I was sitting alone in my living room, utterly exhausted, barely keeping my eyes open. The figure was visible in my periphery, near the doorway, a dark, silent shape. I was too tired to snap my head around. I just looked towards it, slowly, letting my gaze drift from the center of my vision towards the edge. And it didn't vanish. For a terrifying second or two, it was there, in my central vision. Not a blur, not a shadow, but a clear, horrifying sight. It was tall, slender, its limbs too long, too angular. Its face was not a face. It was a smooth, featureless surface of pure light-absorbing blackness. No eyes, no mouth, just a void where features should be. But I felt with absolute certainty that it was looking at me. Its head was tilted slightly, that familiar, unnerving posture, and it radiated an intense, palpable sense of malignant stillness. This moment of clear sight was accompanied by an overwhelming sensory assault. A piercing, unearthly sound, like grinding metal and screaming, erupted, seeming to emanate from the figure itself, filling the room. An intense, biting cold radiated from its presence, making me gasp. The air around it seemed to shimmer and distort, like looking through extreme heat. It was utterly horrifying, impossible, real. And then it was gone, vanished from my central vision. I scrambled back in my chair, gasping for air, my body trembling violently, my mind reeling. The room was silent, still, the air normal, but the image of that featureless black face, those impossible angles, that terrifying stillness, is burned into my mind. The figure doesn't appear as frequently now, not in my periphery, and it has never again broken through into my central vision with such clarity. But the fear is permanent. I can't stand not seeing what's at the edge of my sight. I constantly scan my surroundings, my eyes flicking nervously from side to side, checking my periphery, bracing myself for the sight of that dark shape. The memory of seeing it clearly, of that horrifying second of undeniable reality, haunts me. Was it real? Or did the stress and fear finally cause a brief, intense hallucination? I don't know. But the feeling of being watched, of knowing that something exists just outside the normal spectrum of human sight, something that saw me seeing it, never leaves. And I live with the chilling knowledge that the boundary between my peripheral vision and my central reality is fragile, and that the figure at the edge of my eye might just be waiting for the right moment, or the right level of fear, to step back into full view. And next time it might not vanish. I found it in a small, dusty antique shop tucked away on a side street. It was a wooden carving, small, perhaps 6 inches tall. A dark, smooth wood shaped into a bird perched on a simple base. There were no intricate details, just a rustic simplicity to it. It looked old, felt heavy for its size, and for some reason I was drawn to it. It felt quiet, still, a little piece of silent history. I bought it for a few dollars and brought it home, placing it on a shelf in my living room, where it sat among books and other unassuming objects. For a few days it was just a decoration, a simple wooden bird. Then late one evening, when the apartment was quiet and I was reading on the sofa, I heard something. A faint sound, very low, like a distant humming or a simple soft melody being sung. I paused my reading, listening. I couldn't place it. My neighbors. Unlikely, they were usually quiet at this hour. Outside. No, the windows were closed and the sound felt closer somehow, like it was in the room with me. I dismissed it as my imagination, or perhaps some subtle house noise I hadn't noticed before, but the sound returned. The next evening, and the one after that, always when the apartment was quiet, it was clearly emanating from the living room, and I started to suspect its source. It seemed to come from the direction of the shelf where I'd placed the wooden bird. I conducted a little experiment. I took the bird off the shelf, placed it on the coffee table in the center of the room, and sat back. In the quiet, the sound began again, a soft, simple melody, clearly coming from the bird carving. I picked up the carving. The sound stopped instantly. I put it down. After a moment, it started again. The sound was tied to the object, and it stopped when I held it. This was impossible. The carving was solid wood. No moving parts, no battery compartment, no speaker, no visible mechanism whatsoever. It was just a piece of carved wood, yet it was emitting sound. The sound was non-mechanical. It didn't sound like a music box or an electronic device. It sounded organic, like humming or very soft, clear singing. The melodies were simple, sometimes repetitive, but often hauntingly beautiful, with a quality that felt ancient and melancholic. My initial confusion gave way to a mix of fear and intense fascination. What was this object? How was it producing sound? I tried showing it to friends, picking it up, waiting for the sound to start. But when they were there, the bird remained silent, utterly inert. Nice carving, they'd say, doesn't make a sound. Their inability to hear it was terrifyingly isolating. It meant the sound was either something only I could perceive, or it was tied to my presence, my solitude, or my perception in a way no one else shared. I tried recording the sound. I'd set my phone to record audio near the bird when it was singing. Reviewing the recording later, there was nothing but the normal ambient noise of the room. No singing, no music. The sound refused to be captured, refused to be shared. The isolation and the impossibility of the phenomenon began to take a toll. I was constantly listening, waiting for the bird to sing. The silence in my apartment became charged with anticipation, no longer peaceful, but the necessary condition for the uncanny music to begin. The music itself began to change. The melodies became more complex, sometimes discordant, sometimes achingly sad. Non-musical sounds started to appear within the singing, a faint click like stone hitting stone, a soft scraping sound. What sounded undeniably like a low sigh or a choked gasp woven into the melody. The carving felt subtly different when it was singing, not just quiet, but radiating a faint coldness, or a subtle vibration that I felt more than saw. The psychological spiral was severe. I was obsessed with the bird and its music. What was it? A trapped spirit singing its sorrow. A record of some past event imprinted onto the wood. A form of communication I couldn't understand. The fear of its changes, the addition of the disturbing non-musical sounds, and the growing coldness and vibration it emitted, were terrifying. I felt trapped in a relationship with this inanimate object, compelled to listen, unable to understand its message or make it stop. The singing wasn't always passive. Sometimes the melodies would become insistent, demanding attention. If I tried to ignore the bird for too long, the music would seem to become louder, more discordant, laced with those unsettling non-musical sounds, filling the room until I couldn't focus on anything else. It felt like it was actively trying to compel me to listen, perhaps to feed on my fear or my attention. The music reached a terrifying climax. It wasn't just singing or melody anymore. It was a horrifying symphony of sound. The bird emitted a cacophony of noise, screams, wails, guttural sounds, layered with distorted, fragmented singing and violent, grating noises, all at a volume that felt deafening, not just in my ears, but inside my skull. The sound filled the entire apartment, resonating in the walls, the floor, the very air itself. The bird carving was visibly reacting now. It vibrated violently on the shelf, rattling the objects around it. It felt intensely, unnaturally cold, radiating a chilling coldness that spread through the room. The air around it seemed to shimmer, and for a terrifying second, I thought I saw vague, distorted shapes moving in the air above the shelf, twisting and convulsing with the horrifying sound. The sound was pure horror, a manifestation of pain, fear, and malice. It wasn't music anymore. It was a direct auditory assault. The terror of the sound, the vibrating, cold object, the disturbing visual distortions. It was overwhelming. It felt like the bird was a vessel, and something was screaming through it, trying to break free or convey a message of absolute horror, driven by a primal need to make it stop, to silence the screaming sound. I lunged towards the shelf. With a cry of pure terror, I grabbed the bird carving. It felt like a block of ice and a buzzing swarm of bees in my hand simultaneously. The terrifying sound seemed to peak as I touched it, a final ear-splitting shriek erupting from the carving, accompanied by a blinding flash of cold light from within the wood itself. With all my strength, I hurled the bird carving across the room. It hit the opposite wall with a violent impact, splintering into pieces. The sound stopped instantly. The vibration ceased. The cold dissipated. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, trembling violently, my hand burning and numb. The wooden bird carving was destroyed. Its pieces lay scattered on the floor, but the sound, the terrifying cacophony, the screams, the distorted singing, it echoed in my mind. The intense music hasn't returned, but the silence isn't silent anymore. I sometimes hear faint echoes of the singing, the melodies twisted and sad, or a hint of those horrifying screams, especially in quiet moments. I avoid wooden carvings, antique shops. I don't know what was in that bird carving. A trapped soul, a piece of recorded horror, an entity that communicates through sound. I have no answers, but the experience showed me that some objects are not inanimate, that they can contain mysteries beyond comprehension, and that sound can be a gateway to something terrifying. And I live with the chilling knowledge that I heard the bird sing. I felt its terror, and perhaps by destroying it, I didn't silence the horror entirely. Maybe I just released it, or maybe a piece of its terrifying song, its screaming sound, is now permanently stuck in my head. My study used to be my favorite room in the apartment. It was a small, quiet space where I could read, work, and think. It was painted a calm, neutral gray, with a subtle texture to the walls, like fine sand mixed into the paint, giving it a soft, uneven finish. It felt like a simple, safe space, insulated from the outside world. It never felt like it had a world of its own hidden within it. It started so subtly. I questioned my own perception. Sitting at my desk, reading, I would occasionally catch a movement in my peripheral vision, near the wall. A flicker, a distortion, in the textured gray. When I turned my head to look directly, it was gone. Just the textured wall. I attributed it to tired eyes, the way shadows play tricks, or maybe just the pattern in the texture momentarily looking like something. It wasn't. Our brains do that sometimes, finding shapes in random patterns. Pareidolia, harmless, but the sightings became more frequent, more insistent. When I was in the study, especially in the quiet evenings with the light low, I would see them. Fleeting images in the textured gray walls just at the edge of my sight, not just random shapes but unsettling suggestions of patterns. Sometimes it looked like a face, distorted and vague, embedded in the texture. Sometimes it was like a cluster of eyes, dark and unblinking, made of shadow and paint. They were always just at the periphery, vanishing the moment I turned to look directly. This elusiveness was terrifying. It felt like the wall was doing it deliberately, showing me something, then hiding it the moment I tried to confirm it. It was like a constant, silent game of peekaboo, but with horrifying images. I tried to examine the walls closely. I ran my hand over the textured paint. It felt like paint, solid and real. I looked at sections of the wall under bright light. The texture was uniform, random, no hidden images or patterns fixed in the paint. I took photos with my phone. The photos showed only the gray textured wall, nothing more. I asked friends who visited if they noticed anything odd about the study walls. They looked, tilted their heads, and said, "No, just gray paint, nice texture." Their inability to see what I was seeing amplified my fear, making me question my sanity even while I was constantly witnessing the impossible. The psychological toll was immense. The study, my safe space, became a source of fear. Being in the room, especially alone, felt like being trapped with a presence that was revealing itself through the walls, a presence that was aware of me. I felt constantly watched, not just by potential eyes in the texture, but by the walls themselves. The gray paint seemed to absorb light, making the shadows deeper, more active. The visual anomalies escalated. The faces and eyes in the texture became clearer, more defined in my periphery. Some looked sad. Others seemed to twist into silent screams. Some were just dark, empty voids where features should be. And then came the horrifying sensation of the walls subtly changing physically. I would look at a section of the wall and out of my periphery, it would seem to subtly bulge outwards, a low convex curve appearing in the plaster, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. Or it would seem to recede inwards, creating a strange concave dip. These were subtle, maybe only an inch or two of perceived depth, but they were undeniable and terrifying. The bulging sensation was often accompanied by other subtle anomalies, a localized cold spot near the area that seemed to bulge, Faint sounds seemingly emanating from within the walls, a low, dry scraping, a soft click, or what sounded chillingly like muffled breathing, or murmuring. These sounds, like the visual anomalies, would often stop when I put my ear against the wall, only to resume when I pulled away. The feeling of being watched intensified dramatically, directly tied to the visual and auditory phenomena. It wasn't just a feeling, it felt like the walls themselves were aware, their textures forming eyes that followed me, their subtle bulges hinting at movement within, their sounds a form of communication. I couldn't understand but felt the menace of. The psychological spiral deepened. I was losing sleep, constantly anxious, jumping at every sound. I spent less time in the study, but the fear followed me. Even outside the room, I would sometimes feel the chilling sense of being watched, or catch a fleeting visual anomaly on other walls in the apartment, a hint of a face or a subtle ripple in the texture, before it vanished. The thought that the walls throughout the apartment might be doing this, that my entire home was comprised of watching, breathing, subtly shifting barriers, was terrifying. The visual anomalies in the study walls became overtly menacing. The faces and eyes in the texture were clearer, fixed, looking directly at me from my periphery. Their expressions clearly malevolent or filled with silent agony. The symbols formed by the texture were disturbing, ancient-looking, hinting at things I didn't understand. The bulging areas were more pronounced, giving the terrifying impression of distinct shapes pressing hard against the plaster from the other side, distorting the surface like a skin stretched too thin over bone. The accompanying sounds from within the walls intensified too. The scraping was more frantic, the clicks faster, the breathing sounds louder, sometimes punctuated by what sounded like muffled thuds or low, guttural growls. The cold emanating from the walls was intense, biting. The feeling of being watched was suffocating, overwhelming. It felt like the walls were no longer just watching. They were actively trying to break through, to manifest whatever horrifying thing was contained within them. The climax built steadily, the phenomena concentrating on the longest wall in the study. The textured surface was a chaotic canvas of horrifying faces and symbols, fixed and undeniable, their painted eyes following my every movement. The bulging areas along the wall were numerous and pronounced, giving the sickening impression of multiple forms pressing against the plaster from the other side. Sounds of frantic scraping and heavy thuds came from within the wall, loud and clear, accompanied by deep, non-human growls. The wall vibrated faintly beneath my gaze. The air felt thick, heavy with pressure, and an unnatural cold. The feeling that the barrier was failing, that something was on the verge of breaking through, was palpable, terrifying, driven by pure, animalistic terror. I scrambled away from the wall, backing into the center of the room, staring at the horrifying spectacle. The wall seemed to take on a life of its own. The textured paint visibly rippled like disturbed water, the horrifying faces stretching and distorting. The bulging areas swelled even further, stretching the plaster taut, threatening to tear. Sounds of cracking wood and tearing material erupted from within the wall, loud and violent. For a horrifying second, through what looked like a sudden crack or tear in the paint, I caught a fleeting glimpse of impossible darkness within, and the terrifying impression of a single vast alien eye looking back at me from the blackness behind the wall. The sight, the sounds of breaking through, the feeling of the wall giving way, the cold, the pressure, it was an overwhelming multi-sensory assault. It felt like the very structure of my home was being breached by something terrifyingly aware, and I was trapped inside with it. With a choked scream, I lunged for the door, my only thought to escape the room before the wall gave way completely. I fumbled with the handle, my hands shaking violently. The moment I burst out of the study and into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. The sound stopped. The feeling of pressure and cold vanished. I leaned against the hallway wall, trembling, gasping for air. I managed to force myself to look back at the study door. It was just a normal door. The wall next to it, the wall that had been a canvas of horror, looked normal. Gray, textured paint, But as I looked closer, I saw them tiny hairline cracks running across the surface like a spider web, in the areas where the bulging had been most pronounced, and a fine layer of dust had settled on the floor beneath that section of the wall. The walls weren't completely unaffected. They had stressed. I haven't gone back into that room since that night. The door remains closed. The memory of the walls watching, breathing, bulging, the terrifying faces, the sounds from within, and the fleeting glimpse of the impossible eye is burned into my mind. I look at walls differently now. Any textured surface, any pattern, any shadow feels suspect. I constantly scan the walls around me, especially in quiet rooms, bracing myself for a texture to shift, a shadow to deepen, a subtle bulge to appear. I sometimes hear phantom scraping sounds or whispers from within walls, or feel a localized cold spot. I don't know what was in the walls of that study, what caused them to watch, what was trying to get out. Was it a trapped entity, a manifestation of the house's history, a tear in reality itself? I have no answers, but the experience showed me that walls aren't just inanimate structures providing shelter. They are barriers, and sometimes those barriers are thin, and something terrifyingly aware is waiting on the other side, pressing against them, watching, and sometimes trying to break through. And the knowledge that they stress the walls of my home, that they almost made it through, is a fear I carry with me always, knowing that any wall anywhere might just be a skin stretched over something horrifying waiting to be revealed. My house is old, a 3-story structure with a history I don't fully know. The main living spaces are on the first and second floors. The third floor is little more than a dusty attic space, unfinished, filled with insulation and forgotten boxes, accessed by a narrow staircase I rarely use. The basement is similar, mostly for storage, damp and dim, accessed by a door under the kitchen stairs. I live alone, so when I'm home, I expect silence, the kind of quiet that only comes from being the sole occupant of a large old house, which is why the sound started my descent into terror. It began subtly. Sitting in my living room on the first floor, I'd hear sounds from directly above me. On the second floor, footsteps. They weren't heavy, just the distinct sound of someone walking across the hardwood floor of the living room directly above mine. But I was alone. I'd pause, listen. The steps would move, maybe towards the kitchen above, or towards the hallway. I'd tell myself it was the house settling, the old wood creaking, or maybe sounds from outside echoing oddly. Then I started hearing steps from the third floor, directly above my second floor bedroom. These were different, more muffled by the ceiling and insulation, but still distinct. Scuffing sounds, heavy thuds, like something being moved around up there. My mind went to animals, a raccoon in the attic, maybe. But the sounds were too deliberate, too focused. They sounded like heavy things being moved, or heavy feet walking. The footsteps, both from the second floor when I was on the first or in the basement, and the third floor, became more frequent, more distinct. They had a quality that felt wrong. The second floor steps, when I was below them, were too smooth, too silent, almost gliding, lacking the familiar rhythm of human gait. The third floor sounds were too heavy, too ponderous, punctuated by creaks that suggested immense weight on the joists. I had to know. I checked the second floor when I heard sounds from there. Empty, my furniture was in place, no sign of disturbance. I'd stand directly below where I heard the steps, listening, but the sounds would stop, go back downstairs. They'd resume. The third floor was harder to access, up the narrow stairs behind a door I usually kept closed. When I heard sounds from up there, I'd go up, armed with a flashlight. The third floor was always empty, dusty, silent. The sounds would cease the moment I opened the third floor door, only to return as I went back down the stairs. They knew I was checking. This apparent awareness was terrifying. It wasn't just random noise, it was something that was present, active, and seemed to be reacting to my location and actions. The footsteps felt like they were following me from above, or pacing in response to my presence below them. I started seeing correlations. When I was on the first floor, the steps above on the second floor would be active, moving around. If I went up to the second floor, the steps there would stop, but I'd hear the heavy thuds and scraping from the third floor above me, or sometimes the slower, wetter sounds from the basement below. It felt like something was always on another floor, tracking my movements, staying one level away. I tried to confirm the inaccessibility. I checked all the doors and windows, locked, no sign of forced entry on any floor. I even reinforced the locks on the third floor door and the basement door, but the footsteps continued, sounding from within those locked, empty spaces. The psychological toll was immense. I felt trapped in my own house, hunted between floors, lying in bed on the second floor, listening to the heavy, deliberate thuds directly above my head. On the third floor was agony. Sitting in the living room on the first floor, hearing the silent, gliding steps directly above me, was terrifying. I was constantly listening, constantly aware of the activity on the floors above and below. My heart pounding with every creak, every thud, every scrape. Sleep was a luxury I rarely got. The footsteps became more deliberate, more interactive. When I stayed still for a long time, the steps above or below would seem to approach my location, stopping directly above or below where I was sitting or standing. If I moved, the footsteps would follow, moving to be directly above or below me again. It felt like a terrifying game of cat and mouse, played out through the structure of the house. Accompanying phenomena appeared. When the heavy third-floor steps were directly overhead, I'd hear the joists in the ceiling creak and groan distinctly under immense pressure, and fine dust would sift down from the old plaster. When the sounds were coming from the basement below, the floorboards under my feet would sometimes feel like they were subtly vibrating, and I'd catch a faint, disturbing smell of damp earth and something else I couldn't place. The footsteps weren't just sounds anymore. They were physical manifestations of an unseen presence, affecting the very structure of my home. The footsteps escalated from deliberate movement to overt aggression. They started stomping, pounding, running across the floors above or below me. The sounds were violent now, angry. From the third floor, I'd hear sounds of heavy objects being dragged violently, furniture being thrown around, followed by intense pounding directly above me. From the basement, I'd hear sounds like concrete being scraped, chains rattling, punctuated by heavy, wet thuds and low, guttural growls that vibrated up through the floorboards. The house reacted violently. The second floor ceiling visibly bowed downwards when the pounding on the third floor was intense, cracking appearing in the plaster. The first floor floorboards felt like they were vibrating and groaning under immense weight. When the steps were active below, the sounds of structural stress, splintering wood, cracking plaster, became common, terrifying additions to the cacophony of footsteps and other noises from the empty floors. It felt like the physical barriers of the floors were failing. The feeling was clear. Whatever was up there, and whatever was down there, was aware of me, hostile and actively trying to reach me, attacking the floors that separated us. The climax built one terrifying night. The activity seemed to be centered entirely on the third floor. The footsteps were constant, violent, running and pounding directly above my second floor bedroom. Sounds of smashing and dragging filled the space above. I huddled in my bedroom, staring up at the ceiling, which was visibly bowing downwards, dust and chunks of plaster raining down. The sounds from the third floor intensified to an unbearable level. Relentless, heavy pounding on the ceiling, right above my head. Sounds of cracking wood and tearing material erupted from within the ceiling structure, loud and terrifying. Accompanying the pounding were horrifying sounds. Non-human growls, shrieks, and what sounded like wet, tearing flesh, all seeming to emanate with the footsteps from the inaccessible floor above. An intense, biting cold radiated downwards from the bowing ceiling, filling the room. The feeling of immense pressure pushing down from above was palpable, suffocating. I felt like the ceiling was about to give way entirely, that something was about to fall through. My body was shaking uncontrollably. I screamed, a raw sound of pure terror, staring up at the cracking, bowing ceiling, seeing dust fall, hearing the wood splintering, feeling the intense cold and pressure, hearing the horrifying sounds of breakage and non-human rage from directly above. The barrier was failing, driven by a primal instinct for survival. I scrambled out of the bed, away from the center of the room, heading for the door. I expected the ceiling to collapse behind me any second. The moment I burst out of the bedroom and onto the second-floor hallway, the intense pounding and structural sounds from the third floor stopped. Abruptly, silence. I scrambled down the stairs to the first floor and ran out of the house into the night, gasping for air, trembling, leaving the silence and the damaged ceiling behind. I haven't been back in that house since that night. The memory of the impossible footsteps, the heavy thuds, the scraping, the non-human sounds, the groaning joists, the bowing ceiling, the falling dust, and the terrifying knowledge that something was attempting to break through the floor directly above me is burned into my mind. I look at multi-story buildings differently now. Any old house, any apartment building with floors above or below, fills me with a sense of unease. I hear phantom footsteps sometimes. From empty spaces, I scan ceilings and floors nervously, half expecting to see a crack appear, or dust to fall. I don't know what was making those sounds on the third floor or in the basement. Was it one entity, moving between the empty levels, multiple entities, something that exists in those unused spaces and manifests as sound and physical stress? I have no answers, but the experience showed me that the empty floors above and below aren't just empty space. They are levels in a terrifying multi-story structure, and they can be occupied by things that defy explanation, things that walk around in the dark, listen to you on another floor, and sometimes try to break through the barriers between your world and theirs. And I live with the chilling knowledge that I was haunted from both above and below, and the terrifying possibility that the footsteps might someday follow me to a new house, walking on the floor above or below, a permanent reminder that I am forever listening for the sounds of the impossible. When I moved into my new apartment, I was immediately drawn to one specific room. It was a small space off the main hallway, intended, I assumed, to be a study or maybe a guest bedroom. It wasn't particularly large, just big enough for a desk and a chair, with a single window overlooking a quiet side street. It was painted a calming blue, felt bright and airy, and I decided it would be my study. I spent time setting it up, arranging books, putting my computer on the desk. I walked its perimeter, noted the position of the window and door. It was a simple known space in my new home. The first sign that something was wrong with the room was subtle. I was working on my computer in the study one afternoon. I glanced at the clock. It was 2000 p.m. I got absorbed in what I was doing, the words flowing easily. It felt like I worked for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. I looked up at the clock again. It said 4:30 p.m. Almost 2.5 hours had passed, but it had only felt like one. Wow, I thought. I must have been really in the zone. Time flew. I dismissed it as the feeling you get when you're deeply focused on a task. A few days later, something similar happened, but in reverse. I went into the study to grab a book, a task that should have taken maybe 2 minutes. I remember stepping into the room, seeing the book on the shelf. The next thing I remember is standing in the hallway, holding the book. I glanced at my watch. 20 minutes had passed. 20 minutes, just to grab a book. That was impossible. What had I been doing for 18 minutes? I tried to recall, but my memory of that time in the study was hazy, indistinct. It felt like a gap, a blank spot. These time discrepancies, where the perceived time spent in the study didn't match the actual time passed, became more frequent. Sometimes, minutes felt like hours, sometimes, hours felt like minutes. And with the time distortions came memory inconsistencies. After leaving the study, I would sometimes find that objects I distinctly remembered placing in one spot were now somewhere else. I would remember starting a task on my computer, but find it completed, saved and closed, without any memory of performing the steps in between. Large chunks of time spent in the room would be hazy or completely missing from my memory, replaced by vague, unsettling impressions, a feeling of cold, a sense of pressure, the sound of a faint, unidentifiable noise. I tried to rationalize it. Was it a neurological issue? A form of absent-mindedness amplified by the focus the room allowed, but the time gaps were too significant. The memory contradictions too specific. I decided I had to test it, to understand what was happening. I set up experiments. I would go into the study, start a timer on my phone, place a unique object like a bright red ball in a specific obvious spot, and write down my intentions in a journal immediately upon entering. Then I would spend some time in the room, and upon exiting, I would immediately stop the timer, check the object and write down my memories of the time spent inside. The results were terrifyingly consistent and contradictory. The timer would show wildly different durations than my perceived time. The red ball would be moved, sometimes to a completely different part of the room, sometimes hidden under something, and I'd have no memory of touching it. My journal entries upon exiting would be fragmented, contradictory. Sometimes I'd remember sitting at the desk the whole time, while the timer showed hours had passed, and the ball was moved. Other times, I'd have no memory of vast chunks of the time spent inside, only a vague feeling of unease or a fleeting, disturbing impression, a flash of darkness, a sense of being watched, a cold chill that wasn't there when I entered. I tried bringing others into the room with me. I had a friend sit in the study while I stayed just outside the door, watching the clock. After what felt to me like 10 minutes, I called out to them. "How long has it been?" I asked. "About 10 minutes," they replied. Their time perception seemed normal, but when they exited, I asked them about specific things in the room, or what they did for those 10 minutes. Their memories were perfectly clear, matching the actual 10 minutes. The anomaly seemed to be affecting me, and my perception of time and memory within the room, not others. This isolation amplified the horror. I was experiencing a terrifying distortion of reality, alone. The psychological impact was immense. I was profoundly disoriented. My sense of time shattered. The fear of losing time, of not knowing what happened during those memory gaps, was crippling. What was happening in that room during the time I couldn't remember? Was I doing things I didn't know? Was something happening to me? The atmosphere of the study began to reflect the anomaly. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. Cold spots appeared randomly, regardless of the heating. A faint smell, like old dust and something else, something metallic and stagnant, would sometimes fill the room. These environmental shifts were most noticeable when the time distortion felt strongest. My investigation attempts grew more desperate. I tried setting up a video camera and an audio recorder inside the room before I entered, hoping to capture what happened during the lost time. When I reviewed the recordings later, they were corrupted. The video would skip and jump, showing impossible transitions in time. The audio would have long stretches of static or silence where there should have been sound, or contain faint, distorted noises that weren't present when I was consciously aware. These technological failures only confirmed the room's impossible nature. It affected not just my perception and memory, but objective recording as well. The disturbing residual memories from the lost time became more pronounced, more terrifying. They were like corrupted data files in my brain, fragments of horror that would surface unexpectedly after leaving the study. A flash of a dark, angular shape in the corner of my mind, a memory of hearing a distorted scream that felt like it came from inside the walls, a feeling of intense crushing pressure or being held down, even though I had no conscious memory of those things happening. It felt like the room wasn't just making me forget. It was planting horrifying seeds in my subconscious, glimpses of whatever occupied or happened in that warped temporal space. The feeling of a presence within the room during the lost time grew strong, implied by these disturbing residual memories. It felt like something was there, something aware, something that perhaps caused the distortions, or simply existed within them. The room felt less like a passive anomaly and more like an active entity, fighting my attempts to understand, punishing me with memory loss and planting horrors in my mind. The pull of the room, the desperate need to know what was happening during the lost time, eventually outweighed the fear. I decided I had to attempt a direct confrontation. I would go into the study and actively fight the anomaly, fight the memory loss, try to remain fully conscious and aware for the longest possible duration, to see what truly happened in that room, what it contained. The study felt intensely menacing as I prepared. The air was thick, the cold palpable, the strange smell strong. I set up multiple recording devices, armed myself with a bright flashlight as if light would help against temporal anomalies, and took a deep, shaky breath. This was the point of no return. I entered the room, timer running, focusing every ounce of my will on staying present, on remembering. Immediately time began to bend. The clock on the wall seemed to jump forward seconds at a time. The light from the window shifted unnaturally, like hours were passing in moments. I felt that familiar disorientation, the pressure building in my head, the world around me seeming to shimmer and warp, but I fought it, clinging to my purpose, to the need to see. The room warped around me. The walls seemed to stretch, the corners to deepen into impossible angles, matching the fleeting images from my residual memories. The air filled with sounds, not just the faint noises from before, but a cacophony of whispers, screams, unearthly noises, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves, overwhelming my senses. And in the center of the room, where there should have been only empty space, a shape began to coalesce, a dark, angular form that seemed to absorb the light. I was experiencing the full horror of the lost time, the anomaly, the room's true nature, and I was awake for it. The shape moved towards me, its presence overwhelming. I felt that familiar horrifying pressure, but amplified, pinning me in place. The sounds from the walls were deafening, the sights terrifying. It felt like my mind was being torn apart, the room trying to force me to forget, to succumb to the nightmare it contained. I fought, screaming, thrashing, desperately trying to hold on to memory, to consciousness, to reality. And then abruptly it stopped. I was standing outside the study door, leaning against the hallway wall, gasping for air, my body trembling violently, slick with cold sweat. My timer lay on the floor beside me, its display frozen on the duration I had intended to stay, but the clock on my phone showed hours had passed. The study door was closed, the apartment was quiet, normal. The room looked just as it always had, a simple study, but I remembered, horrifyingly vividly, the warped room. The overwhelming sounds, the dark, angular shape, the feeling of being held, the fight for my mind. The memory of the climax event was crystal clear. I had fought the room's effect. And in doing so, I had seen what happened during the lost time, what resided within the room's temporal distortion. I never entered that room again. I've sealed the door, put furniture in front of it, pretending it doesn't exist. But I know it's there, and I know what's inside. The time distortions and memory loss stopped after that night. But the memory of what I saw, of the fight, is a permanent scar. I question reality constantly, checking dates, clocks, looking for subtle inconsistencies. Nightmares of the warped room and the dark shape haunt my sleep. I live with the chilling knowledge that the room is still there, distorting time, containing something terrifying. And I know what happens during the lost time, because I fought to remember, and the fear of what I saw, of the presence I felt, and the knowledge that it exists within the seemingly normal confines of my home, in the room that forgets, is a terror that will never fade. The room may forget the time, but I will never forget what happened within its impossible moments.